And yeah, whenever I'm watching, even though Vlad has like say a, a limited amount of screen time, I want to say at least 15 minutes, because he has the big massive flashback, i.e. the Rasputin dance monologue, which I want to do actually about once you in a little while, especially when I get into the writing thing. Uh, it definitely feels like, oh, this is definitely Dracula, but you don't want to say he is Dracula, even though you could obviously see this, like the signs of him pointing to, being, you know, Dracula, because one, his name is Vlad, and a lot of uh, Dracula medium have always had him called Vladimir or Vlad or something to that effect, and that's because of the Vlad the Impaler thing, even though it wasn't really something that was like, automatically, whenever someone's doing a Count Dracula thing, is like, oh, they usually call him like Vlad Dracula or something like that, or something
Yeah,
to that.
Vlad was the only like big sort of like, just to make it pretty clear. Whether he's Dracula or not, he's a stand-in for the idea of it, and everybody knows what I'm talking about when I talk about this character, or when they see
Yeah,
it in the movie, whether they get frustrated or not. Like, why didn't you just call him Dracula? He's public domain. It's like you get the idea.
yeah,
His name is Vlad. He's an old ass vampire, and here's all these sort of quick references to things that are identifiable culturally as Dracula like. It's not really that big of a
yeah,
thing or huge of a leap. And then I just get made his full name feel like pompous and
yeah.
continental.
And
Vlad Manfred Castaneda, um, and sort of marrying together the Manfred, which is a poem by Lord Byron,
oh,
and the sort of by the way the sort of juvenile male's sort of attraction to Byronic heroes, and the way Vlad sees himself. And so and then Castaneda, Juan Carlos Castaneda, the ayahuasca guy who said he was a met a shaman, and that just all that sort of like bullshit, um like romantic romantic male stuff. I just wanted
yeah,
to kind of make fun of and just mock a little bit. It was very important to me to make this movie and make sure that all the like from a certain perspective, um, I think men are pretty ridiculous.
yeah,
I mean, from a certain perspective, people can be pretty ridiculous, but men are funny, and
yeah,
I wanted to make sure that all the men in this movie are somewhat funny. Like
yeah,
they're somewhat being poked fun at, even when they're dangerous.
yeah, like Vlad. And yeah, I just wanted to ask that, is like, is Vlad really Dracula? And I do have my answer. It's like, yes, he is Dracula, but we're not saying he's
He's
Dracula.
not he's not Vlad the Impaler.
Yeah, we're not saying he is, but I will say that it is.
He's he is not Vlad the Impaler. He is Vlad Manfred Castaneda. I do know who he is in sort of a historic context, but that's between. And if you dig around, you can find it. I've said it on Twitter once, but like it's sort of like a there is somebody that I'm like, this is my origin for the character, and and people can make up their own. But I say explicitly, he is not Vlad Shepis, or whatever his name was.
Yeah. Uh, but yes, back to casting, and the biggest casting
Oh, and by
was,
the way, I wrote the role for MC Gainey. He was in Boogeyman Pop as well. He's a friend. I love
oh,
that guy. I'm a big fan of his. He did Boogeyman Pop as a favor, and he's really great in it. And I wrote this role for him to just come and have some fun and chew some scenery, and he did not
yeah,
disappoint. I would work with that guy to the end of time. Just a
and
really special dude.
and he actually did work with James's father, Bill Paxton, on a movie called Club Dread, playing essentially his roadie's right hand.
Yeah,
And if you ever watch Club Dread, it's an amazing, hilarious film. And not
I've
only
seen it. Yeah, and Bill's incredible.
Yeah, he is incredible in that movie because it's like the same thing with Vlad. He's not really playing Jimmy Buffett, but he's basically playing a character like Jimmy Buffett with the same exact like
It's
kind of like mannerisms and
the,
songs and
the term is analogous. He's
yeah,
analogous to
no,
people know what it is
yeah.
in the same way that that's yeah, it's pretty clear. But yeah, it's a great role.
But yeah, back to casting before we go into writing. Although this kind of like goes right into writing. The You posted on, I believe, on your Instagram of the script that says Laurel must be played by a trans actress because something I can't remember because I tried again trying to remember what you wrote per se, but the character is transitioning on her own, so we must have an actress who is like who is like that.
That is
How
not
oh
that is not what what I wrote was, and yeah, it's
yeah,
easy
I
to
was trying
find.
to
It's on
remember
my
too.
Instagram and on my Twitter. What I wrote was in the script to make it very clear that the character of Laurel is to be played by a trans actress and trans actress alone, and
Yeah,
that the script is not going to specify where on in the where in the stage of transition this character is at, because it should be an open dialogue with whomever we cast, so that we're
yeah,
not boxing ourselves into something like that, so that we can open it up to make sure we get somebody so that we are it had to be an open dialogue. There was
yeah,
no there was no specification of where it was supposed to be. In fact, it was the opposite of that. It was there is no specification here. That will be an element that will be a part of the collaboration between me and whoever gets the role.
yeah. And that's something I do enjoy about the movie is that even though even though it's kind of like in the plot description or synopsis, what have you, the fact that you don't mention that the character of Nicole is transgender at all until make maybe at the end where Vladimir looks at her and because
If
Vladimir looks at her goes looks at Duke and
it's
says and goes this is new and interesting for you or something to that along the lines like that when you were
it's it's him being just an asshole.
yeah
The 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 movie's full of what I feel are um, keys to that. That
yeah
if it's something you pick up on, you pick up on it, but it's not central to the plot.
yeah which is I really enjoy it because Laurel is a great
Because
character.
it's straight out the gate. There's no hiding it. The it's not a character neutral quality. It is not. She's not just arbitrarily trans though either. It is not about the trans experience, but it is not. I would never want to write any character where they're just arbitrarily anything, because nobody's arbitrarily anything. Everybody's world is going to be different or interact with them differently based upon their religiosity or their fashion, their all sorts of things,
Yeah,
their background and whatnot. So it's there from the jump. Basically, we first get to see Laurel. She's being patronized by somebody,
yeah,
and that and nobody. It's not really. It's just is what it is. I just felt like that's the point of that scene is not to show a trans person getting patronized. It's to do what any scene where you're meeting characters is. It's just sort of to get you into their world and on their side, and understand their sort of likes and dislikes and things like that.
yeah.
Um, but there's not too much I want to go into about this particular subject, because one, I've gone into it a lot,
Yeah.
and two, it's just the um, there's a lot more going on that I can talk about besides that element, you know.
Now, I do want to ask is like how much, and you did mention before that whoever was cast as Laurel would have a lot of what was it, input to say the least. When and and this was like before Supergirl, so you know, I don't know. And I only knew that Nicole had like maybe a couple of credits to her name and most of like a documentary, that sort of thing too. How did the casting of Laurel like drop into her lap or her script?
Well, we had the breakdown. It was sent to agencies, and I looked at people and immediately responded to her. Um, she had had one. Her reel was the only credit she'd had, and it was on her reel was this segment in Royal Pains.
Yeah,
And I watched that, and coming from a background of working with predominantly non-actors, I don't. I feel like I can look at people and know what they're sort of what they can do. I run off
yeah,
of instinct more than anything in that regard. Um, I feel like I understand the language of acting to a certain degree. And I feel like I can work with young people pretty well. And I responded to her immediately. And even in that 1 minute, it was just very clear to me like this feels right. I would like to talk to this person. And when I talked to them, we hit it off really well, and I just knew it had to be her. And also a big factor for me was um, two things. Like, I just feel like you can. Nicole just reads to me as such a presence, and
yeah,
especially on camera. And also, it was important to me that they read as somebody who believably is graduating high school,
yeah,
the young enough so that people could, because that's always sort of a thing in movies. It's like 27-year-olds playing 17-year-olds and stuff
yeah,
like that. And I want to avoid that as best I can. Um, and I'd written the role of Mark for James because you just as a director you write for the people you like working with,
yeah,
and I felt like there was a convincing enough um, age gap between them to make that relationship look real to me. Um, and that was a big factor, and that it was as simple as that. I talked to her, hit it off. She sent in an audition tape. I coached her through the audition tape so that the producers would feel comfortable. I made sure I saw it first, and it was a no brainer to me. I'm like,
yeah,
this is who I want. There was a lot of not a lot actually. Frankly, it was unfortunately a dearth of signed and managed trans actresses at the time. And I'm not saying that there was a dearth of actresses. I mean, ones that had we did not have the time to do an open casting call. So
yeah,
it had to go through agencies because just there's no way I could have been sifting through so many. It had to be whittled down to some degree. So, but I did see some people who were great, um, and you just know it. Running off of instinct, I just felt like she was perfect for it. Um,
yeah.
and and I like I'm very glad. I think she's incredible.
Yeah, and especially when you have like a small time frame, and
A
not only
tiny time frame, yeah,
yeah,
a very small time frame.
a minute time frame, and you have to deal with okay, I gotta get at least casting done within by maybe the end of the week, if not sooner. And when you feel like when you find the actress, actor, crew member, what have you, and you're like, okay, this is the person I want because they get it. So the moment you see that they get that, wherever they get from the script, especially if they talk about the character and like they automatically know what they're talking about that character, like okay, yeah, they get this. Not only they get the character, but they get the story, they get the themes, that sort of thing too. And speaking of story, I know from interviews that you did, you kind of like said that when writing the film, you kind of like had this gem and the holograms type of feel for it. When you were writing the thing, did you have that like notion of that movie? I mean, that movie, that sort of like structure in general. Because when, because I,
I've to be clear, I've never seen that movie. I'm talking about the old show.
yeah, I know, I'm talking about the old show as
Yeah,
well. Like, I'm not talking about
a
if I,
very
if I was talking about the movie, I
when
would
I was
say that movie called Jim. That's supposed to be about Jim the holograms. No
yeah,
offense to it, but you know,
I just I had glommed on to certain things again, like that. I felt like that was a I'd made two very sort of musky male, even though the central character of the middle section of Boogeyman Pop is broken into pieces is focuses on teenage girls. I enjoyed that, making that piece a lot, and I wanted to center a movie around like yeah, young like I wanted to make a movie that's centered around women and and I just kind of keyed into all the sort of like I don't know, just kind of like fun having I mean less to do with even the it being women, but just like just a glam um, sort of thing, like something that was just different
hmm,
and that spoke to a host of influences I have that weren't present as much in my first two movies. You know, like another big influence would be, you know, The Wicked and the Divine. You know, Kieran Gillen and Jim McKelvey's comic, and so many other things. But Gem and the Holograms was I mean, I didn't go back and watch any episodes. I haven't seen that show since I was
yeah,
probably 6 years old. It just that idea of the like, and then like it was the riot girl power thing, and because you know I'm just as influenced and bitted by the Ninja Turtles. It was just
yeah,
like I wanted to make something fun. Like I mean, that's I guess the big push there. I wanted to make something fun. I wanted to see if I could make something hard R and lurid, but still have it uh, forgive me for gendering it, but I mean this in sort of broad sweeping terms. It's something hard R and lurid, but still coded for young women. Like
yeah,
with
gotcha.
because I feel like a lot of movies aimed at young women typically tend to be afraid to be messy or gross. And
Yeah,
I think that's a sort of mistake because I know you know movies like Ginger Snaps and The Craft are so beloved and they're full of messy, gross things. And I just thought, well, I would like to contribute to that.
and they're also
Um,
dealing with very mature themes too. So it's like a lot of these movies nowadays, especially, and I'm not like frowning upon the movies nowadays, but there are like horror movies that deal with that are like that, but they don't really like
I
maybe
don't
like the
I don't
last
even really consider Bit a horror movie.
yeah
It is a horror movie. It's in the horror genre, but it's not scary. It's more of
yeah
a comedy. It's more of just a I don't know. It's just sort of it's as much of a scary movie as something like Lost Boys is, which is another
yeah
template. I mean, an obvious template.
yeah
It's not like a movie that it's meant to be fun. I guess
yeah
it's more meant to be fun than it is intended to be scary because it's not scary at all.
no
And so the dominating approach was how do you make a hard R fun sort of take on things like the Gem and the Hologram and or in the tradition of Ginger Snaps or the Craft, you know.
the Lost Boys and stuff like that too, where it's just like and
Yeah. And
it's
that was another thing is a lot of movies like The Lost Boys and a lot of vampire movies in general have a lot of queer subtext.
yeah
And
every
I was like, well, let's take the subtext right out of it, and instead of being stand-in for things like that, like people don't need stand-ins or subtext anymore. They exist in the world. You know, I just thought we're just gonna do that. We'll
Yeah.
just make it text. The queer elements that are usually present in vampire stuff, and there's been a lot of like textually queer vampire media as well, but a
Yeah.
lot of it is subtextual and just making it directly text.
And speaking of the vampire stuff, one of the great things about writing a vampire story is that you could essentially create your own lore, and you don't have any set rules to go with, because they could be like, oh, vampires could be existing in the daylight, but they could be generally weaker because sunlight, they don't, sunlight doesn't kill them, but sunlight just weakens them, something like that. When you were writing this film, like, how much lore did you have fun with, and how much lore did you kind of like stick to? Okay, is this kind of like the same vampires that you see? They drink
I think
blood.
the only hard and fast rule is like, in some way they've got to drain blood or the life essence. I think is the only thing that needs to be there. Everything else is up in the air because a lot of the elements that are codified that people think are directly lore come in the 20th century, in particular the movies.
Yeah.
But I had like the idea of sunlight. Like Dracula doesn't get killed by sunlight in the book.
No.
That's not even there. And if you go back further, like that, some of these ideas are introduced later, and it's just you can do whatever you want. I mean, it's not a. For me, I wanted to give the vampire element, even though the movie was going to be as today as possible in some regards, like in so much as like the verbiage, the world, and the what's going on in it, like the feel of it is very modern. I drew from a lot of the sort of modern LA bands that are around and put them in the soundtrack and things like that. I but I wanted the vampire part of it to be folkloric and fairy tale, more rooted in fairy tale than let's say the last 40 years of the movies of vampires. By that I mean folkloric element, in so much as they you can't really see it. It's not really noticeable, but their fangs and their nails are crystals. That feels like a fairy tale element to me. Like if you look, they have like that sort of they're styled like crystals. If you look under if you look closely, like there's the edges, the center's opaque, but the edges start to get clear, and there's like the veins.
Oh, wow.
In them, like how crystals have, and same thing with their nails, and same thing with their sort of power. There's like a Peter Pan element to it all. Like I wanted it to be more, like the sun can't kill them. And another sort of folkloric element is fire kills them. Fire is a very primeval thing,
Yeah.
And so fire being anybody's weakness, but especially theirs, like they touch it and it doesn't just burn them, it turns them to wood. Again, not an element that's explained, but if you notice, like they become ashen wood.
Yeah.
And I just thought that would be an interesting way to go with that, is that it affects them magically. These aren't science vampires. These aren't Judeo-Christian vampires. Excuse me, sorry, car just drove by.
No,
these aren't rooted in a Judeo-Christian sort of mythology. It's kind of like older than that, and sort of more fairy tale logic than that.
Yeah. Which you do get the sense of, because it doesn't feel like it's like the vampires you've seen for the past, like, say, 40 years or 60 years, given what cinematic vampires have done. But it feels like more along the lines of fairy tale, but more like myth type of vampires, where it doesn't feel like they are blood sucking, life essence and drinking sort of thing too, and they are monsters. But at the same time, they also feel like, especially, they all the vampires you see in this movie do feel like they actually could exist, but also they also feel like they just feel human, even though they have this animalistic side to them. And you kind of mentioned this before, LA. Uh, I like the fact that you give LA almost its own character because and and shooting in LA, especially at night, it feels like it's like almost dreamlike compared to some areas in LA or something like that. And granted, I don't live in LA. I live in New York City, and shooting in New York City at night gives much more of a very noir feeling. But from what I saw, especially with you filming at night in LA, it does have like a very dreamlike quality. Uh, from your in filming with LA, and you mentioned this before, is like you were kind of like pulling from like real life stuff that you did. Like how much stuff that you see in LA, like this again, as I'm trying to like I have two questions trying to come out at the same time, even though I'm trying to form into one question. Uh, how much of LA type of like when you were considering the LA scene, even though the LA scene around that time it was like maybe a few years ago, so I doubt it hasn't changed that much. When you were filming in LA, like how much of the LA scene were you considering to be shown into its full effect? Because James's character, you know, I believe he's playing an actor because he mentions to Laurel later, it's like you haven't even asked me about my auditions or something like that since you came here. So, like, how much of
Yeah.
the LA scene was a factor going into this movie that happens to be set in LA?
I mean, it was as much as any place. I tried to make it grounded within the place it exists. I wish I could have grounded it a little more, but again, budgetarily, I mean, essentially the movie's shot in one location.
Yeah,
I'm happy that that doesn't seem to be the case where people notice that, but they're outside of them going to the Echo and a couple other shots. It is a bunch of faking. It is all essentially shot in a warehouse in Los Angeles.
yeah,
But yeah, I just rooted it in the place, even down to the warehouse itself. I had written a very specific sort of ideas and locations of what you'd find in Los Angeles. I don't I myself feel like it doesn't quite capture Los Angeles how I wanted it to, but instead you do what you can, and I with the budget and the time, it it reads a little. The whole movie has a patina of artifice, which was not in the script. The script was going to be a little bit more distressed and lived in, but with the time and the budget we had, I realized that this is I have the budget of about a CW episode of TV.
yeah,
And so, well, I'll make it CW, but the type of stuff they'd never put in CW. So I leaned into art. I leaned into artifice. I made the designs of the vampire wardrobes less uh, distinctly punk or really lived in, or and made them more iconic and simple, and everything's more um, again, it's much more pop. It has a
yeah.
it's not as lived in as I initially conceived. Everything's very much. I had to run the other direction and embrace artifice in a way that I'd never done before to get that to get it to work as a whole. But I in writing the script, I mean, it's based in LA, and I would not. I didn't put too much. It's not that I didn't put too much thought into that. It's just that it just is what it is. You just
Yeah,
observe and report.
yeah.
The Echo's a real place. The geography is here. The makeup of the people around. It's like it's as best represented as I could do or think about.
And since you just mentioned makeup, I do have two questions that were left about the about bit itself. And the last two questions I have evolved the special effects. So and it's weird because when you're watching this film, it isn't really I mean, there is a lot. I mean, there is blood. There is a lot of blood, but it isn't really blood heavy. You know, there is like special effects. There is like people's throats being cut or people's throats being bit into, hence the title. And but but when you see the vampires, they're not like stereotypically pale. They actually have like skin color and stuff like that too. When it came to the special effects and considering the amount of time you had, where and when did you just say, uh, how was working with the special effects with the, yeah, there we go. How was it working with special effects with the amount of time that you had? Because there are a couple of flying shots, and the flying shots, it does look like, oh, it looks like they're on like kind of like on a green screen or something to that effect.
They're not on a green screen. They are on wires. It was a nightmare. There's just not enough
Oh,
time for any of it. I actually wanted to cut that flying scene because that was we were supposed to have 2 cranes. We ended up having 1. There was no time to even rehearse that. Like, again, there was no prep. There was no let's get the actors used to the harnesses. It was like I had to do all this rooftop stuff with 1 crane at night. And so I don't think that came across very effective. I wanted it out of the movie. The producers kept it in. It is not one of my favorite things. But the special effects and the makeup effects people did a great job. Nobody had a lot of time. I pushed as hard as I could to keep practicals in, and I think the practical stuff that remains in is really good.
yeah, yeah, it is.
But there were some things where it's just it just wasn't possible to keep practical due to mainly the time. But I am proud of the fact that basically everything outside of the fangs and the nails is practical.
Yeah.
Like the head stomp, the throat slash, the blood. There's no VFX blood in it. The heart is a VFX element as well, mixed with a practical. But I put as much as I could, and it's always going to be an uphill fight to get and keep practical stuff, because VFX is ostensibly cheaper. I don't quite agree with that, but that's sort of a different conversation. And the VFX department did a great job too. They were really friendly, and I loved working with them. And they, considering our budget and time, they went above and beyond and did really cool shit. I feel like.
Like the burning effects looks amazing compared to like other burning effects you were seeing like in other stuff, because it actually does feel like when some like a vampire or a person is being burned, it actually feels like they're actually it actually
Yeah,
feels like practical.
yeah, they really did a good job with that, and a lot of it too is having actual flame elements there. Like we did light people on fire and do that kind of stuff, and then it was enhanced in VFX. But the they just did a good job. I mean, it's sort of like most of the things that happen to the body are practical in the film. Any of the stuff that veers into magic, it starts to go into VFX. Yeah.
So with my last
But
question,
they were really great to work with. I wish I had more time. Also because that's so much fun to do just in
yeah,
general. It's fun to squirt blood and slash throats and get all that stuff going and vomit. And I love doing that kind of stuff. And the people I was working with, Gage and Marcel, who were the practical effects, makeup effects people, they were fucking awesome and gung ho, and they really just, given the time and resources, just brought it. And I loved working with them, and I think we'd all agree that like everybody did the best they could with the time they had, and that we all
yeah,
kind of wish we had more time and more. Like we didn't even get to like try a thing out. Like you see like you watch the making ofs of a lot of movies that involve practical effects and monster and creature effects, and you see them do like the videotape tests and stuff like that to
Yeah.
see how it works. We didn't have none of that shit. It was just go, go, go. And considering, I think it came out pretty decent.
Yeah.
Um, and if and they crushed it. You know, the department heads in the movie crushed it, and the only real problem with the execution falls on either me or time or sort of, you know, fights with producers taking up time.
Yeah, the way you just phrased it just now is like I'm having flashbacks to my time in theater where we would have like legitimately there'd be sometimes my theater department would have shows like in between months, so like be a show in February and then there'd be a show in like April. But in that little meantime, the show in February, you know, after it ends, we go straight into the next theater production, and we would only have like maybe in a month and a half, maybe even just a month or so, depending if there wasn't like any major holiday or something like that, to go in, create the, you know, create the set design, and then work on that set design, and then suddenly it's like, oh, by the way, the set design changed, so we have to move a couple more things. So it definitely feels like that rush of we just gotta work with it and just go. If it works, it works. Hopefully, it works, and a lot of it in the film works spectacular because a lot of the gore effects really does look well made, but also reasonably realistic, especially the head stomp. You know, I don't see a lot of head stomps in film outside of like maybe the recent Halloween movie. And whenever there's a head stomp, people don't like, oh, they kind of like make it look like a fake head stomp. This actually looks like an actual head stomp that, you know,
Yeah,
once you
yeah,
see it, like if he pours it just right and you just like, oh, okay, that's a dummy, obviously. But the way it's filmed and framed, it's like it's, you know, props to
yeah.
your practical, you know, effects and stuff like that. Is like it, especially with the tiny time frame you all had too. Uh, yeah, especially and on my last question about Bit, I know you kind of like mentioned this before on either I forgot it was either on Twitter or maybe Instagram. It was probably Twitter, but I remember you saying something along the lines of uh, the release was screwed around because of COVID. Because I remember you saying that there was supposed to be the major release, like the premiere was supposed to be at the Chinese theater in Hollywood, and
It played the Chinese for fests.
oh,
No,
okay,
I mean, before you go off on a long thing, uh,
yeah,
I make it pretty simple. It's a lot of this happened to a lot of movies during pandemic, which was their theatrical release, even a limited theatrical, which is still good. Like
yeah,
you want the movie to come out in theaters. We had a limited theatrical release that was planned through the distributor, and once COVID hit and theaters shut down, it was just dumped onto VOD. You know,
yeah,
and that happened to a lot of things during that time, and it was just a shame. I mean, there's not too much to say about that. That's just what happened.
yeah. And it is kind of like, and having a limited release is even still spectacular too, because it's that's how independent movies are,
Yeah,
and
it would have been in 10 major cities, and
yeah,
I would have, and it could have. Who knows how that would have done? We consistently in festivals sold out shows and packed the house at major international festivals, and did really well. I feel like in certain markets it would have done really well, and you know, not been some box office gargantuan hit, but
yeah.
just as a filmmaker who you just want your movie in the fucking theater in general, it was
Yeah,
a real drag to have worked, you know,
so hard,
basically
and
my
then
entire life to get to this point where something was getting a theatrical release, and then for elements outside anybody's control that being taken away. And then it was the only option was, well, I mean, this was always going to be about rentals anyway, and the
yeah,
theatrical release was sort of a loss leader. Depending on how it did, it was still just basically still promotion for the rentals, I guess, in some way, how lots of movies are. But it just went straight to that, and I just it sucks. That's a drag.
Yeah, but at least you could watch the film on Tubi, as currently as I film this episode, it's still on Tubi. I hope it's on Tubi forever. And Tubi's a great service because you get to see a lot of great independent movies and just movies in general.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, I'm happy any way somebody watches it. I'd prefer they rent it because that way it makes money.
yeah.
But it's whatever. It's beyond my control, and I'd rather any way somebody watches is fine. With me.
Now, uh, do you consider getting a? I don't know if this probably still is the same question, but I mean the same answer before, but trying to get this. I remember you saying that you couldn't get this movie out for like a proper DVD Blu-ray release because of yeah.
Well,
It,
listen, man, I don't want to get into that kind of stuff. That's that's
okay.
that's between the that's distribution stuff. It goes
Oh,
into politics and things like that. It's just, and also it's kind of just boring shit. So,
oh,
if there's ever, uh, uh, I would love for there to be, you know, licensed, proper, full on DVD release and Blu-ray release and all that jazz and all that fun stuff. That would be great. But as it stands right now, it's just not where we're at, and I have zero control over things like that.
okay. All right. And that's it of all my questions. So I have a bit, which seem a lot because that's sadly, even though I asked you about Wolfman's Hammer, but I understand like Wolfman's Hammer was your first film. Oh, uh, okay, that actually is a good question. From what and you kind of like mentioned this before, is like from the first two movies you did to where you are now, uh, how much stuff going forward are you going to say, I know that's going to be a bad idea, I'm not going to do it, but like, how much are you still learning as a director, or do you feel like even as a director, you can never stop learning?
I think you're always learning, but I think the thing I would like to get um, to happen, and the thing I'm sort of striving for, since again my first movie, even though I conceived of Wolfman's Hammer to be a 10K film and maximize what you can do with 10K, and utilize what's in the frame to get people to believe that you're in locations and places that aren't there and stuff, and people, it's amazing how much you can fool people if you know what you're doing. What I'd like to do though is get to a point where I have a robust enough. There's always going to be problems. There's always going to be things that are you know light, and time is always going to be a battle of some kind. But if I could make the split a little bit more even on the side of just being able to execute, as opposed to always having to problem solve, I would
Yeah.
like to get to a point where most of it is based around what I want to execute, and not how the fuck do I get this with what I have, if that makes any sense.
Oh, it definitely does make sense because I think even as I try to write a screenplay or something like that, I'm always learning new tips and tricks just to write a screenplay and not make it more like a formulaic screenplay or something like that. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just that, every story that you have to make, at least make it interesting enough to be like, oh, that hasn't been something that hasn't been done before, even though it has been done before. What you're doing is just putting a new lease on a old idea, essentially. Uh, so yeah, that's all my questions I had for Bit. I do have three more easy questions that's fairly straightforward. The first question, you kind of already made the note. You already mentioned it on Twitter that you've written a script that is a throwback to like the race, not car racing, the car racing films of the 1970s.
No,
Uh,
road movie.
yeah, road
Yes,
movie.
man.
There we go. For some reason.
It's something that might go through, it might not. It's not. It's just there's not a whole lot I could say. But it might be my next thing. It might not. You never know how these things work.
Yeah, but
Um,
if it is your next thing, if it is your next project, could you, even if it's not your next project, could you mention, I mean, not elaborate more about it, even though it's not like trying to spoil a lot?
um, I guess all I could say is that it's uh, very much in the vein of things like Two Lane Blacktop and Easy Rider, and which is my favorite film genre, is the sort of late '60s, early to mid '70s sort of counterculture road movie. That is just going to use that as a template for whatever creative fetishes I have. I mean, there's not a whole lot I really want to say about it. Quite yet, yeah.
Now, aside from Twitter and Instagram, do you have any other social medias that you use regularly?
No,
So it's just mostly just Twitter and Instagram, which you could
it's
follow.
it's only Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah. And
I,
us and what and this is I don't know, this is a good question. I don't know if you have the answer, but to those who are still watch, especially if they are an emerging director, what type of advice could you give to a person who is struggling or thinking about directing for the first time?
well, if I'd say, just finish the damn thing. There's all sorts of demarcations of quality or whatever. Just whatever. I could be here all day describing, what you should learn with lenses and how you should understand your resources and all that kind of stuff. But the truth is most people don't finish what they start. And the quality is one thing, but the big demarcation between professional and unprofessional, the one thing, rich parents aside, if you've got that, you're lucky and go fuck yourself. But like when it comes to that kind of thing, one of the elements that's sort of unifying between anybody who makes it anywhere professionally, and I think in the arts and anyway, is that they finish it. Like finishing is key. Like, get it done. Yeah,
And
no matter what it takes, get it across the finish line. Showing that you can close a loop on something will get you further ahead than um, than just spinning your wheels or constantly conceptualizing or getting in your way. Just if you're a screenwriter, finish the fucking script. Like you could have the worst script in the world, and if the right person reads it, it could change your life. You could have the best script in the world, and the wrong people always read it. It never goes anywhere.
yeah,
The point is, though, if you don't have a finished script, none of that happens. And it's the same thing with if you want to go direct, or you're doing it at an indie level or a micro budget level. I made my first movie on an even at the time outmoded camera. The director of photography is really good, and I love working with him. But it was a DSLR. It was a T2i, Rebel T2i, and then Boogeyman Pop was shot on a C300. Don't be ashamed of your tools, and don't take the tools and try to fool people that they're not those tools. Find the language of the tool you're using and how to maximize that, I think. And that would be what I would say.
that's a great answer because a lot of my directors or filmmakers in general, at least guess wise, they have different answers. And I don't think a lot of them have told me or anyone else to finish the damn thing. And I think if you are trying to finish something, at least try and finish it. At least could, it may be like what you just said before. It may be like the most horrible. It may be horrible just to read, but someone who might look at it goes, "This is interesting. I could use this," and then they could go from there. All right, Brad. Thank you for being a great guest on the podcast. to those who are still watching, listening, thank you for watching and listening and listen to me ramble sometimes. Uh, I hope you have a pleasant day, night, evening, whenever you listen to this. And thank you. And please stay safe and be well.